Hey, to all of you who have gone through some sort of Christian deconstruction, for those of you who have moved far from your American Jesus, we are having an important gathering at Spero Day for one day on Tuesday, October 10th. It's our post-evangelical conference here in Nashville, and we have an amazing lineup of teachers. Pete Enns and Brian McLaren are going to be here by video. Carrie Lattiser, who heads up the Post-Evangelical Collective, will be there. Scholar David Gushy will be there. Stan Mitchell, who is an advocate for LGBTQ inclusion in Christian spirituality. Lindsay Nobles from Onsite will be there. Josh Scott from Grace Point and myself, we will all be there. And get this, it's only $25 for the whole day. Lunch is included. At the end of the day, there's beer and refreshments. So there are several ways that you can register. One, just point your phone at this QR code. But if you're watching this on your phone and you can't point your phone to it, just go to speroday.com and you can register for the conference right there. So I hope to see you Tuesday, October 10th.
I've been on the verge of breaking, couldn't find my way out of here. I saw you standing there waving, making all this hell disappear. You are my holy water, you are my river deep. Wash me away and take me higher, 'cause something about your love just sets me free. Something about your love just sets me free. I have my time being reckless, holding back my heart for too long. All those empty nights made me helpless, and I was fading like the end of a song. You are my holy water, you are my river deep. Wash me away.
Well, hey, Spero Day, and it is good to see you, and I'm so glad you are tuning in wherever you're watching. My name is David Perez, and I'm the lead minister of this very, very unique church here in Nashville. But I realize there are so many of you tuning in from all points around the country, other nations. I know we have folks watching in the UK, in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, parts of Europe, parts of the Middle East, various American cities. So welcome. You know, I'm beginning this series called Hearing Voices, and what I want to talk about today and then over the next few weeks is, can one really hear and discern God's voice, a spiritual voice? What does it mean to be able to hear our own inner voice and trust it? What does it mean to be able to spot it and listen to our inner voice? And is that in line with our spiritual lives or not? And then on the last week, I'm going to talk about the whole idea of hearing voices when louder voices out there drowned out my inner voice and my ability to trust my own voice and trust my own spiritual life and leading. So that's what I'm beginning today. So again, wherever you're at, welcome to Spero Day. Well, as I mentioned today, I'm beginning a series called Hearing Voices. And today I want to start off this message about learning to trust my own inner voice. I want to ask you this question and try to be as honest with yourself as you can. How well would you say that you trust yourself? I mean, how well would you say you really, really can trust yourself? You know, for most of us, and myself included, the whole idea of self-trust, that can be very tricky. We have this tendency to second guess ourselves, to not, listen to our gut, to sometimes hang on to negative memories from the past where we made some sort of mistake, we made some sort of bad decision, and those things stick with us. So it's hard to trust ourselves because of that. And it can just create challenges in our lives, in our relationships. It can create challenge in our spiritual lives. Now, one thing that became very crucial for me, especially in my spiritual journey, it was learning to listen to my inner voice, and it was learning to trust my inner voice. And here's what I discovered. Learning to trust my own inner voice, it did not take me away from a spiritual connection with God. It did not take me away from trusting in God, because there was this transcendent oneness, this connection between the two. The Apostle Paul talks about this. But this lack of being able to trust myself, that was debilitating. Now, here's what I want to say. It's very human. There's nothing wrong with you if you have difficulty trusting yourself, especially in a lot of our American Western Christianity. We were never taught to trust ourselves. Many of us come from this biblicistic, literalistic, this very conservative evangelicalism, this American Jesus Christianity. And you and I were never encouraged to trust our inner voice, never encouraged to trust our feelings or to trust ourselves. In fact, we were discouraged from trusting it. I mean, if your experience was like mine, you were theologically reminded that every part of you was sinful and depraved, and trusting yourself, well, that's part of the problem. You need to no longer do that. That's what's wrong with you. You now need to run from your body, run from your mind, run from all your sensual darkness, run from your feelings as a counterfeit guide. Don't ever trust yourself. You're only to trust God and be led by the Spirit. So I don't know about you, but I did just that. And for me, and you might be different, it created a very detached spirituality, a very external spiritual life. And here's the deal, I was very committed to it. Now, I think it's crucial for us in our Christian spirituality to learn to listen to our inner voice and learn to trust it. I actually think that is spiritual, because we've just been so trained in these authority structures, right? That we just ended up trading our own agency for some other external authority. But listen, I've always been fascinated with Christ's teaching on the Spirit when he was teaching the apostles. And he said, the Spirit of God lies within you. The Apostle Paul's teaching said God's Spirit dwells in us. From the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, Ezekiel, it says, I will dwell within them, walk among them, and be their God. The dwelling of the Spirit is within us. The key word there is within. So what does this all mean? Well, I think our historic tradition teaches us this. Look at this in 1 Corinthians. But the person who is joined to the Lord becomes spiritually one with him. I mean, take that in. The very concept of our historic faith is that God dwells within us and we become one with God. I think trusting in God means we do end up trusting in ourselves. And when we are trusting in ourselves, if we are one with God, that is in trusting God. I find that helpful. And I think there's a few things you and I can do to enhance this ability to trust ourselves. Trusting ourselves, it involves this willingness to rely on our own integrity abilities. We rely on ourselves to meet these challenges. For me, trusting in myself, it's both human and spiritual. There's a theological word for that in our tradition. It's called incarnation. So the ultimate gamble with the greatest potential gain in life is to trust yourself. And that in so doing, you gain this level of a new kind of freedom, a new kind of authenticity and peace that is unreachable any other way. Trust requires living in your own skin, recognizing that you are the best judge and calibrator of what is best for you. So, do you trust yourself? Do you tend to live, with the effect of trusting more in other people or trusting in some rigid doctrine that doesn't ultimately reflect the real you? Or alternatively, do you, trust yourself that you are capable of handling these unexpected twists and turns in life? And here's the key that really helped me. It was this, and I'll talk more about this next week, but let me mention it now. It's practicing listening to your inner voice. Okay, so let's talk about this practice of listening to your inner voice. And it does take practice and even learning to recognize a distorted inner voice, like your inner critic that's always harping on you, or this God critic that's always telling you you're spiritually not enough. We may have learned as children to trust and rely upon the authority of others to tell us what to do and when to do it. But there is a profound and authentic inner voice that it lies dormant within us. And it's dormant until we start to listen to it, recognize it, become aware of it, and it speaks a deep truth about us. And it can sometimes be the most discerning thing that speaks to us about ourselves. Some people call this, obviously, their inner voice, or call it their true self. But it also has this spark of divine in it because God resides in us. I mean, Jesus said in John 14, the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. And then in John 16, it says, when he, the Spirit of truth, has come, he will guide you into all truth. Whatever the Spirit hears, the Spirit will speak and will tell you things to come. So it's learning to listen and then to exercise that voice. And just like physical exercise that we do, like to strengthen our core muscles, it's sort of the same thing. We must strengthen this core self by learning to exercise this voice and listen to it. That's how we learn to trust ourselves. Otherwise, we remain, we just remain vulnerable to the external sources of authority that tell us what to do, or just to simply, react to them, waiting for their approval, wanting them, to approve of us in some way. Listen, this is why some of us grew very tired of an authoritative faith. It's also why some people don't leave it, because there's this dysfunction that we need it. For me, I had become profoundly aware of the fact that whenever I felt out of balance in my life, the bottom line was I wasn't trusting myself. And as I explored my own internal wiring, I discovered something remarkable. This lack of self-trust was fundamental to how I was living my life. It was how I was building my faith. And for me, it was all to avoid pain and suffering. There was an ironic and fundamental flaw in my approach. In my effort to achieve this greater happiness, thinking it comes by avoiding pain and suffering, I actually ended up feeding it by focusing upon avoiding rather than this centering trust I sought, right? I had equated that a buoyant faith meant no pain, no suffering. And it just became cockeyed for me. And for me, what it ended up being, I wasn't trusting myself, nor was I actually trusting in God. And inherent in my approach was the fact that this had been going on so long. I was actually attempting to write the script of my own life. I recognized this. This was a pivotal shift for me. It took some serious awareness for me to develop a physical, a mental, emotional, a spiritual well-being, to wake up this awareness in my life. And not trusting myself, it actually was an ironic way for me to keep control in my life. Doesn't that sound crazy? But by not trusting my life, I gave myself the security of control. Now, one of the things that Franciscan Richard Rohr says about this whole idea of trusting ourselves or being able to listen to our inner voice, well, we have to start by discharging our loyal soldier. He talks about this in his book, Falling Upward. And Rohr tells this story that in Japanese culture, which is rich in ritual, has a strong sense of the importance of symbol and aesthetics and ceremony, that at the end of World War II, Japanese communities were welcoming home veterans, returning soldiers. But they noticed they were not ready to re-enter civil society. Certain veterans, their whole identity from their formative years had been to be this loyal soldier to their country. But as they were returning home, they now needed a new or broader identity, and communities recognized this. So they created this ceremony whereby the soldier was publicly thanked, publicly praised for their service to their country and to the people. And then after the soldier was profusely thanked and celebrated, an elder in the community would stand up and with great ethos say, "The war is over now, and the community needs you to let go of that. You served us well, you served the country well, but now you're needed as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, and to have a life beyond being a soldier." And so Rohr talks about this in the sense that this is what can happen to us spiritually. So many of us have been loyal Christian soldiers. There was something part of our small selves. It's not a bad part of us, but something in our little spiritual lives, our little spiritual egos, that was taught to be the loyal soldier, and it dominated our spiritual lives. But discharging that loyal soldier, it's going to be necessary to finding this authentic inner authority that you can trust. It's what Jeremiah talks about in the Hebrew scriptures. God's law, it's written on your hearts. The Spirit of God is within you, so you can discharge that loyal soldier and trust yourselves. And one of the things I noticed most in people who feel stuck in life, or their self-expression, true self-expression, is somehow paralyzed. They're just paralyzed with this should. I should be doing X, Y, and Z. And this inner critic, this God critic, at times just controls them. And to overcome this inner critic, just learning to trust God. It's not what silenced that inner critic. When I was the loyal soldier trusting God, it didn't silence that inner critic at all. In fact, it just bred more internal spiritual conflict, because I must be doing something wrong. But here's what did work for me. It's when, instead of treating that as the enemy, I'm supposed to trust God, trusting other things is the enemy, I'm the enemy, when I just thanked my loyal soldier, welcomed my loyal soldier home. Jesus humbly said in Matthew 7, "Come to me, all who are tired and weary, who carry heavy loads. I'll give you rest. Place my yoke over your shoulders and learn from me, because I'm gentle and humble. Then you will find rest for yourselves, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Folks, this is why I am very wary of warlike language in Christian speak. I'm a conqueror, I'm a soldier, the devil is the enemy, this is the enemy, those kinds of things didn't settle this internal conflict. But when I had a more humble approach that Christ speaks of, that I just come and welcome, this inner critic is true about me when I gave that space. I think of when I take the tube in London, mind the gap. When I just gave myself a gap, there was just this ease. Even Paul talks about this in Philippians, where he says, finally, my friends, focus your thoughts on what is true and noble and honorable and lovable and admirable, on some virtue, on something praiseworthy. It's just when we mind this gap and have a more gentle approach to ourselves, there is this peace that comes. Finally, let me say some things about what it means towards healthy, mature adulthood and, a healthy adult spiritual life. You see, the problem with us when we subconsciously take orders from our loyal soldier with this whole idea of protecting ourselves, well, that's actually no longer needed, no longer necessary for you to be a healthy adult. It's not. Now, this whole idea of being a loyal soldier, it's part of childhood. Yes, of course, and it was needed. But when you do this as an adult, it's quite inhibiting. That's at best, and it's damaging at worst. And this is true in our spiritual lives. Unfortunately, we just can't, wish our loyal soldier away, snap a finger. Why? And have it go? Because it's intrapsychic. It's some of us in our lives, these are such well-worn paths. So even though we might want to wish it away or be done with it, some of us have been doing this so long, for so long. And when you treated it as the enemy, this is against my spiritual life or how I'm supposed to live as a spiritual person, this whole conqueror mindset, it just doesn't work. It's not until, like that story that Roar tells, that you just go, I'm going to welcome my loyal soldier home and thank my loyal soldier for being there when I needed it. But it's no longer needed now, and I need to discharge my loyal soldier and say, I'm going to be a spiritual adult, and part of being a spiritual adult is not trusting in God in childish, not childlike, childish ways, knowing that God is indwelling me, and it's about trusting myself, trusting my inner voice, that it is able to navigate me in this life. And I don't need to listen to all of these voices, even if that is spiritual. You can say, I got this from now on. I'm grown up now because God is indwelt within me. So what's next? Some of you are wondering, okay, what do I do next in my spiritual life? Well, this is it. The loyal spiritual soldier that you have been, you now have discovered, it's actually taking you far from the oneness with God. In fact, what you discovered is the more loyal you've been, the less truer you have become. And when I think of Christ's model, Christ didn't model this. He modeled something else with his own disciples. The first year they followed. They were loyal soldiers. The second year they started to do things on their own. But the third year, when Christ was crucified, it was now all on them, and they had to trust in themselves. That was part of their spiritual development. And anybody then telling you trusting in yourself is not biblical, run from that kind of person with that kind of faith, because they will continue to make you debilitated in what I think is true and authentic Christian spirituality. So learn to trust that inner voice. And next week, what I'm going to do is talk about how we can listen to that inner voice, knowing it is at the heart of our true selves, and that it is one with the sacred voice of God within us. Well, before we go, let me say a prayer. God, I pray that we would have the courage to discharge our loyal soldier, but not as an enemy. It's not about being spiritual conquerors, and that is an enemy. That loyal soldier was us, and it served us well. And so it's time to say, welcome home, loyal soldier. But your services in that sense aren't needed anymore. I'm a spiritual grown-up now, and I'm now going to trust my own voice. And God, help us to know that oneness, that sacred oneness, that when we are trusting you, it means we're trusting ourselves. And when we are trusting ourselves, because you are within us, it also means we are trusting in you. I pray for my friends, and for me too, that we would learn to trust that inner voice. In this way, we become spiritual adults. And it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Been walking to a city I cannot see, through the depths of the valley where the sun can't reach. I've been high, I've been low, I've been looking for the river that could fill my soul. Been walking to a city I cannot see. Fill my cup, Lord, run it over. Give me love, give me joy, give me peace. Fill my cup, Lord, run it over. I am your child in need, Lord, I need you to fill my cup.
Hey, before we go, I just want to say to those of you who are part of our online community, who are even financially supporting us, thank you. We just could not keep up the voice of this church without you. And I want to let you know we need it. You know, the kind of church we have in many ways is an outlier. So the fact that you financially support it helps it. And so if this church is meaningful to you and you are not giving to it, I would just ask that you would consider it. And it's real easy. All you have to do is point your phone right to this QR code right here, and it'll take you right to our easy giving. And if you're on your phone while this QR code is up and you can't point your phone at it, just go to speroday.com, look in the upper right-hand corner where it says Give, click on that, and all of our giving, whether it's through this QR code or online, it is as secure as the 5 things you will buy on Amazon this week. So we need you, and if you can start giving in some way, it would mean a lot. And if you are giving, thank you so much. I'll see you next week.